Welcome to the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series. Today is day 22. My name is Lynn Johnston and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. As always, today first we want to talk about how you're going to be moving your story forward today. Today, the protagonist and his or her allies are experiencing the second plot point. And like we talked about yesterday, the plot points, first and second plot points, are crises that are precipitated or triggered by the protagonist and his or her allies directly encountering the antagonist or the antagonist forces. And because we are so far into the story and you want to have an active protagonist, your protagonist and their allies are going to be attacking the antagonist forces in some way. And today, something is going to go horribly, horribly wrong. It could be because your protagonist doesn't have the full picture. It could be because your antagonist has been preparing for this and has some tricks up his sleeve and has basically been setting things up so that the protagonist is woefully outgunned and outnumbered. And your protagonist might know this and go into the conflict anyway because they've determined that they're going to try and find a way to win. Whatever it is, it could be a Pyrrhic victory where your protagonist technically wins but takes such incredibly awful losses that it feels like a defeat. It could be something that basically puts the protagonist and antagonist in a stalemate. It could be something that causes the protagonist and his or her allies have to retreat or withdraw to a different position that maybe keeps them safe but also precludes them from making any progress towards their ultimate goal. So there are different ways that this horribly, horribly wrong thing can happen, but something needs to go wrong today in the second plot point. For your protagonist, one of the things you can ask yourself is, what did the protagonist fail to take into account or not know about when he or she planned the attack? Also, how does this unpleasant surprise and the unhappy ending, whether it's a Pyrrhic victory or a defeat or a stalemate or something else, how does this unhappiness trigger the protagonist's doubts about his or her personal growth and about his or her ability to defeat the antagonist and achieve the goal that they've been trying to achieve for the whole novel? Also, you can ask yourself what happens to the other characters when the antagonist thwarts their attack. Do all the protagonist's allies survive? Do some of them sacrifice themselves, further burdening the protagonist with doubt about his ability to do what he's trying to do, and grief and anger and all the things that go along with losing a friend or losing an ally, guilt? You might also want to ask yourself, did the antagonist know that the protagonist and his or her allies were coming? If the antagonist knows, he's going to be prepared in different ways than if it's a surprise. And it's fine if it's a surprise. There's nothing wrong with taking your antagonist off balance. But of course, the antagonist needs to find a way to rally and come back from that surprise if that's how it's going to work today. So think about how all the people who are around your protagonist are going to be affected by the defeat that the protagonist experiences today, how they're going to maybe contribute to it. If you had some characters defect at the midpoint or at the first pinch point, or maybe secretly plan a betrayal but not defect yet, this could be a place where that is going to hit the protagonist even harder. Conflict. You can ask yourself, what surprise does the antagonist reveal that gives him or her the advantage? What valiant effort does the protagonist make to defeat the antagonist anyway? And we're getting closer now to the climax of the story where, unless you're writing a tragedy, your protagonist is going to win, but not yet. So here we need to see the precursor of that ultimate effort that the protagonist will be making at the climax. This is going to be a little bit of foreshadowing or give the reader a glimpse into what kind of climax we're going to see. And we'll talk about that again in Story Promise. So think about maybe how this second plot point might in some way subtly mirror or foreshadow or be a foil for maybe things are going to go very differently here than they are going to go at the climax, but the contrast between the defeat here and the win for the protagonist at the climax, maybe that's actually going to make a point for you or illustrate your protagonist's growth or amplify the theme of your story. And finally, you can ask yourself, what is each side going to sacrifice, lose, gain, take on as a burden? Basically, what is going to be the outcome for each side in terms of pluses and minuses during and after this confrontation at the second plot point? And also, you might want to think about, I didn't mention it in other characters, but looking at conflicts, when things go to hell in the second plot point for your protagonist, this is where you want some of your protagonist's allies to show their true colors. If they're cowards, if they don't really believe in the cause, if they're really just doing this for themselves, if they're planning a betrayal, that the interpersonal conflict, this is a great time to put some of that in here when you're looking at conflicts for your second pinch point, because those kinds of interpersonal conflicts are great triggers for the doubt that happens in the dark moment that's coming up next. Setting. How does the setting work to your antagonist's advantage? And how does the setting shape the protagonist's response to the antagonist and the antagonist's surprise? And what I mean by that is, for example, if your antagonist has set up an ambush for your protagonist in a canyon, that canyon is going to very strongly influence how your protagonist is able to fight back. And it doesn't have to be literal, it can be metaphorical. For example, if your antagonist is bombing the hell out of your protagonist's childhood home, or has just set on fire a building that your protagonist's loved ones are in, that's going to very strongly affect how the protagonist is going to respond to that. And even if your protagonist is very noble and selfless, their response is going to be different if the antagonist is directly hurting a loved one than they are if it's just like the antagonist is just influencing or affecting or impacting some people that the protagonist doesn't know. It's always going to hurt more when the person who's being hurt is special to the protagonist. So whether it's psychological or metaphorical or an actual physical element of the setting that is impacting how the protagonist responds, you want to think about that. That's not just a source for conflict. It's also something that helps you develop your protagonist more deeply. Remember where the second plot point is another big moment in your character's growth arc, and how the protagonist responds to what the antagonist does, especially if your antagonist is a foil. If you set your protagonist up and your antagonist so that they're very similar, except that your antagonist has already made a bad decision and your protagonist still hasn't made that choice yet, so that your antagonist is basically someone that your protagonist could become if they let themselves fall prey to the dark side, or if they fall prey basically to the weaknesses in their hearts. If you've got that kind of a thing set up, the setting can very much be used to trigger the protagonist's awareness of how he could become or she could become the antagonist if he isn't very, very, very careful. So looking at your story promise, what are you going to promise the reader about the climax of your story? How is this fight here going to reveal things about your protagonist and your antagonist that suggests how the climax of the story is going to work? Getting started, I always recommend do your pre-writing ritual, do your pre-writing exercise, do whatever you need to do to get back into that groove where you're writing your story and you're immersed in your story world. And something else to think about, I've broken this down by days, assuming that you are going to make a certain amount of progress each day, because NaNoWriMo is focused on writing 67 words every day. But realistically, when you're writing a story, some story points, some plot points feel bigger than others. And the second plot point is a pretty big conflict. If it takes you a couple of days to write it, don't worry about that. That's just the way your story is unfolding. You are wanting to ramp up the pace and ramp up the tension right now. So if this has to be a big battle and it takes you 5,000 words to write, so you spend the next 3 days working on it, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Just keep pushing through it. In edits, you might cut it down and you might discover that writing 5,000 words for the second plot point was perfect. And either way, that's cool. So don't worry about it if you're not exactly on track. This is a guideline, and you always want to shape the story blueprint or the plot structure you're using to your specific story. And the character growth arc can affect that too. If your character grows more during some plot points than others, it's possible that you might need to spend more time focusing on your character's reactions to the bigger points, or maybe insert a couple extra small scenes that show the protagonist interacting with other people in ways that lets the reader know how he or she is struggling with their growth arc. And that's okay too. Again, this is only a guideline. This is not something you need to follow religiously. It's just here to help you figure out where you are in your story and which direction you want to go next. After you write, always celebrate your progress. If you have made it to day 22, you are awesome. A whole lot of people have dropped out of NaNoWriMo at this point. So recognize and acknowledge that you're doing a great job. Don't forget to prepare for tomorrow. You want to make it easier on yourself so that tomorrow you can just jump right into the writing. Keep clearing off your desk. Keep getting your notes out. Whatever it is that you're doing that makes it easier to get started, do that tonight. Thanks for stopping by. Happy writing. Hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.